My name is David, and I am 48 years old. For nearly 2 decades, I thought I had it all figured out. My wife, Lisa, and I built a life that looked picture-perfect from the outside. 2 great kids, a successful career, a beautiful house in the suburbs, and a marriage that seemed solid. Lisa is 43, still as energetic and captivating as when I first met her. She has always taken pride in her appearance, staying fit and active, practicing yoga and running every other morning. I was proud of her, and honestly, I was proud of what we had built together. But, as I have come to realize, sometimes appearances can be deceiving. Lately, things had felt off, though I kept telling myself it was nothing. Lisa had been more distant, more preoccupied with work. She had always worked hard. Her job as a marketing executive demanded it, but over the last year or so, her schedule had become more erratic. More late nights at the office, more business trips, more client meetings on weekends. I wanted to believe it was just a busy season, a natural phase in any marriage. After all, my job had its fair share of stress too. I run a real estate agency, and with the market constantly shifting, my work-life balance had never been perfect either. We were just two professionals caught in the grind, right? But there were subtle signs I could not ignore, though I tried. Conversations at the dinner table became shorter, less meaningful. She stopped asking about my day, and when I asked about hers, she would shrug it off with a quick, "just busy." The physical distance between us was growing too. Our bedroom, once a place of warmth and connection, had turned cold. The intimacy we once shared felt like a distant memory. One evening, about 3 months ago, I brought up the changes. I asked Lisa if everything was okay, if there was something we needed to talk about. She looked surprised, maybe even a little irritated, and told me everything was fine, just work stress. I wanted to believe her, and I did. At least, I tried. After that, I convinced myself I was overthinking things. I threw myself deeper into my own work, thinking that if we could just get through this busy period, things would go back to normal. But deep down, the doubt lingered. It all came to a head on a crisp autumn morning, a day I will never forget. I had taken the day off after closing a big deal at the office, the kind of sale that should have left me feeling on top of the world. Instead, I woke up with an unsettling feeling in my gut. Lisa had left the house early, telling me she had a client meeting downtown. She had been doing that more frequently, these client meetings. Normally, I would have thought nothing of it, but that day was different. Something gnawed at me, something I could not shake. After breakfast, I decided to take a walk. It was a beautiful day, the kind that usually helps clear my head, and I needed some time to think. I walked through our quiet neighborhood, past the park where our kids used to play when they were younger. I kept walking, hoping the fresh air would settle my restless mind. As I approached the downtown area, I saw the coffee shop where Lisa and I used to go on weekends. It had been a long time since we had done that, just sat together, enjoying each other's company without the distractions of work, phones, or kids. I found myself missing those simple moments more than I realized. That is when I saw her. At first, I was not sure it was her. She was sitting at an outdoor table, facing away from me, but I recognized the jacket she was wearing, the way her hair fell over her shoulders. She was laughing, her head tilted slightly to the side. In that way she always does when she finds something really funny. My heart sank. Then I saw him. Jake. I recognized him immediately. He worked with Lisa. She had mentioned him a few times in passing, said he was smart and good at his job, one of her colleagues from the finance department. I had never thought much of it at the time, but seeing them together, sitting so close, the way she touched his arm lightly when she spoke, I felt my stomach twist into knots. This was not just a casual lunch between colleagues. I stood there, frozen, watching them from across the street, unable to move. Part of me wanted to run over, demand to know what was going on, but another part of me could not bear to confront the truth that was staring me in the face. I told myself there could be an innocent explanation. Maybe they were discussing work, maybe it was just a friendly gesture, but deep down, I knew better. After what felt like hours, though it was likely only a few minutes, I turned and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get out of there, to think, but all I could feel was anger, confusion, and a growing sense of betrayal. When I got home, I sat in the living room, staring at the clock, waiting for Lisa to come back. My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Why did I not see it sooner? What did this mean for us? For our family? That evening, when Lisa returned, I watched her closely, searching for any sign of guilt, any clue that she had been with him. She smiled at me, the same way she always did, as if nothing was wrong. It made me sick to my stomach. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I held back. I needed more than just a gut feeling. I needed proof. And so, I waited. I watched. I began to pay closer attention to her behavior, her schedule, her phone calls. The more I looked, the more cracks I began to see in the life I thought we had built together. It was not long before the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, and the picture they revealed was one I never wanted to see. The days that followed that afternoon were some of the longest and most agonizing of my life. I had always prided myself on being level-headed, the kind of man who does not jump to conclusions without evidence. So, that is exactly what I decided to do. I would get proof. If what I saw was as bad as it seemed, I needed something more concrete before confronting Lisa. A single lunch with a colleague might have been innocent, no matter how intimate it had appeared from across the street. But my gut told me there was more, and for the first time in my life, I was prepared to follow those instincts. I started paying attention in ways I had never thought I would need to. Little things, like how often Lisa was texting when she was home, or how she would step out of the room to take phone calls. I noticed how her work trips seemed to come up suddenly, usually with little advance notice. Her schedule had always been busy, but now it was unpredictable, and that unpredictability felt deliberate. I began to track her time away more closely. I even started keeping notes, something I would have considered paranoid just weeks earlier. The turning point came one Friday night, a few weeks after that day downtown. Lisa had told me she had to work late to prepare for a big presentation on Monday. Normally, I would not have thought twice about it, but this time, I decided to check. After she left the house, I waited about 20 minutes, then I called her office. My heart was pounding as I listened to the ringing, hoping to hear the usual background noise of her busy workplace. Instead, I got her voicemail. I hung up and sat there, staring at my phone, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe she was in a meeting, maybe she had stepped out briefly, but my mind kept replaying the image of her sitting across from Jake, laughing, touching his arm. After a few minutes, I tried calling again. Voicemail again. That was when I made the decision to follow her. I grabbed my jacket, trying to quiet the voice in my head that told me I was crossing a line. But something stronger was driving me now, the need to know. I got into my car and headed toward the office, not even sure what I would do if I found her. As I drove, my mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. What if she was not at work? What if she was with him? What if they had been together this whole time, right under my nose? When I reached her office building, my worst fears were confirmed. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few scattered cars. But Lisa's car was not there. She had not been working late, not here at least. I sat in my car for a while, unsure of what to do next. My hands were shaking, my throat dry. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a growing sense of helplessness. It was as though the life I had known was crumbling, piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. I knew I could not go home without answers. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I called her. I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked her how work was going. She answered quickly, sounding upbeat, telling me she was wrapping up a few things, but would be home soon. I asked if everything was going smoothly with the presentation, and she assured me it was. The calmness in her voice made me feel sick. I hung up the phone, sitting there in the dark, trying to decide what to do next. There was no doubt in my mind now. She was lying to me. The question was, where was she, and who was she with? That night, Lisa came home around 10 p.m., as she had promised. She walked in with a casual smile, greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, and asked if I had eaten dinner. The normalcy of it all was unbearable. I wanted to grab her, demand answers, force her to tell me the truth. But I could not. Not yet. Not without proof. So, I played along. I told her I had eaten earlier and that I was tired, ready to call it a night. She nodded, said she would join me after a quick shower. I went to bed, but sleep was impossible. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, listening to the water running in the bathroom, wondering how long she had been lying to me. Was it months? Years? When she finally climbed into bed beside me, I felt like a stranger was lying there. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling exhausted but determined. If I was going to confront her, I needed something undeniable. I needed to catch her in the act. So, I did something I never imagined I would do. I contacted an old acquaintance, someone who worked in private security. His name was Frank, and we had crossed paths years ago when I was buying property for a new development. He had mentioned his side business back then, surveillance, tracking, things most people would never need. But now, I needed it. I met Frank at a small diner on the outskirts of town. We sat in a corner booth, the smell of stale coffee and bacon filling the air. I explained my situation in as much detail as I could without choking on the words. He listened carefully, his face unreadable, occasionally nodding as I spoke. When I finished, Frank leaned back in his seat, folded his arms, and said, "I can help you, but you need to be sure about this. Once you start down this road, there is no turning back." I hesitated for a moment, thinking about what that meant. What if I was wrong? What if I was overreacting, misreading everything? But the image of Lisa with Jake flashed in my mind again, and I knew I could not ignore it any longer. "I need to know the truth," I said. Frank nodded. "All right, I will set up surveillance. We will follow her, track her movements. If she is up to something, we will find out." I left the diner that day feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that I was finally taking control, dread for what I might discover. But there was no going back now. The wheels were in motion, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. Frank had assured me that his team would be discreet, and I knew I had to wait for them to gather enough information. But the waiting was unbearable. Every time Lisa walked into the room, my mind would race, trying to piece together any subtle clues in her behavior. Was she avoiding eye contact more than usual? Did she seem more distant? Or was it just me, overanalyzing every single moment? There were nights when she would come home late, offering casual excuses like client dinners or work events, and I would nod along as if everything was fine. Inside, though, I felt like I was slowly losing my grip on reality. Each night, I would lie awake, wondering what I would do when the truth finally came out. About a week after I met Frank, I received the first phone call. It was early in the morning, before Lisa had woken up. Frank's voice on the other end was calm and professional, but the words he spoke sent a wave of cold dread through me. "We have confirmed your suspicions," he said. "She met with him again yesterday afternoon. Same man, Jake." I felt my chest tighten. Even though I had expected it, hearing the confirmation felt like a punch to the gut. Frank went on to explain that they had followed Lisa from her office to a hotel on the outskirts of the city. She and Jake had checked in, spent several hours inside, and left separately. The pattern was clear. "She has been seeing him regularly," Frank continued. "Every few days, usually during her client meetings. We have photos, timestamps, everything you will need." For a moment, I could not speak. It was one thing to suspect, but to have undeniable proof staring me in the face, it felt like my world was collapsing. "Send me everything," I finally managed to say. Frank agreed and told me that the full report, along with photos, would be ready for me by the end of the day. He asked if I wanted to continue the surveillance, but I told him it was enough. I had seen all I needed to see. After I hung up the phone, I sat at the kitchen table in silence, staring out the window. The morning sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light across the yard. It was strange how something so peaceful could exist outside, while my entire life was unraveling inside. I had always thought betrayal would feel different, sharper, more immediate, but instead, it felt like a slow, suffocating weight pressing down on me. I wanted to confront Lisa right then and there, but I knew I had to be smart about it. I had to keep my emotions in check. Rushing into an argument without a plan would only make things worse. So, I waited. I spent the day going through the motions, trying to act normal, but every moment was filled with the knowledge that everything was about to change. That evening, when Lisa came home, she was in a good mood. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and asked about my day. The casualness of it all made me want to scream. How could she act like nothing was wrong? How could she pretend our life was normal when she was living this double life behind my back? But I kept my cool. I played the part of the unsuspecting husband, asking her about her day, listening to her stories about work. It felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life. As we sat down to dinner, I found myself studying her, trying to understand how the woman I had loved for so many years could do this to me. She looked the same, sounded the same, but everything about her felt foreign. The report from Frank arrived later that night, sent to a private email address I had set up. I waited until Lisa went to bed before I opened it. The file was large, dozens of photos, notes detailing each of her meetings with Jake, timestamps that corresponded with the times she had told me she was at work. The evidence was overwhelming. I clicked through the photos one by one, each one driving the knife deeper. There they were, standing outside the hotel, laughing together. Another photo showed them entering the lobby, their bodies close, his hand resting casually on her lower back. The intimacy between them was undeniable. In one of the final photos, taken from inside the hotel, they were sitting in a booth at the bar, their heads leaning in close as they talked. The ease with which they interacted, the comfort between them. It was clear this had been going on for a while. I felt a wave of nausea rise up in my throat, and I had to close the laptop. This was it. The life I thought I had was over. There was no going back from this. The question now was, what was I going to do? For the rest of that night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed next to Lisa, listening to her steady breathing, wondering if she had any idea that I knew. I thought about our children, about the life we had built together. Was it all a lie? Had everything we shared been meaningless to her? And what about Jake? How long had this been going on? How serious was it? By morning, I had made a decision. I could not live in this limbo any longer, pretending that everything was fine when it was not. But I also knew that I needed to confront her in a way that gave me the upper hand. I could not let my emotions get the best of me. I had to be in control. That day, I went into the office, trying to focus on work, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept rehearsing the conversation in my head, imagining how it would go. Would she deny it? Would she try to lie her way out of it? Or would she admit everything? When I got home that evening, Lisa was already there, sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled at me, but this time, her smile did not reach her eyes. Maybe she sensed something was different. Maybe it was just my own growing awareness of the truth. I walked over to her, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment. There was no turning back now. Lisa, I said, my voice steady, we need to talk. Lisa looked up from her phone, her smile fading slightly as she registered the seriousness in my tone. She set her glass of wine down on the counter and turned toward me, a questioning look on her face. Sure, what's going on? She asked, her voice calm, as though she had no idea what was about to come. I stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts, trying to keep the surge of emotions at bay. My mind raced with everything I had discovered, all the images from Frank's report flashing before my eyes. I had spent days preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, the words felt stuck in my throat. I want to ask you something, I said, my voice firmer now, and I want you to be honest with me. She tilted her head slightly, her expression still unreadable. Of course, David. What is this about? I took a deep breath. There was no easy way to do this. I know about Jake. For a split second, I saw her face freeze, just a flicker, but it was enough. That tiny moment of hesitation, the way her eyes widened ever so slightly, told me everything I needed to know. But then, she quickly regained her composure, her expression shifting into something more guarded. Jake? She repeated, feigning confusion. What about him? My heart was pounding now, the anger rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. I know you have been seeing him. I know what you have been doing. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. She blinked, trying to process what I had just said. The air between us felt thick with tension, the silence stretching on for what felt like an eternity. I could see her brain working, trying to decide how to respond, whether to deny it or confess. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and shaky. David, it is not what you think. I let out a bitter laugh, one I could not contain. It is not what I think. I have proof, Lisa. I have photos of you two together, at the hotel, at the bar. I know you have been lying to me about your work trips. I know this has been going on for months. Her face went pale. The confident, put-together woman I had known for so long suddenly looked small, vulnerable. She glanced down at the counter, unable to meet my eyes. I did not mean for this to happen, she whispered. I clenched my fists, trying to stay in control. How long, Lisa? How long have you been cheating on me? She shook her head, her hands trembling as she reached for her wine glass, but she did not pick it up. It started a few months ago, she admitted, her voice barely audible. It was not supposed to be serious. It just happened. I stared at her, the disbelief washing over me. Just happened? You mean you just accidentally met him at a hotel over and over again? You accidentally lied to me, day after day? Do you think I am an idiot? Tears welled up in her eyes now, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the anger burning inside me was too strong. I was lonely, David, she said, her voice breaking. You were always working, always busy with the agency. I felt like you did not see me anymore. Jake, he noticed me. He listened to me. I shook my head, not believing what I was hearing. So, this is my fault? You are blaming me for this? No, she said quickly, shaking her head, her voice desperate now. I am not blaming you. I am just trying to explain. I never wanted to hurt you. I did not plan for this to happen. You did not plan for this? I interrupted, my voice rising. You planned every lie, every secret meeting. You planned to betray me, Lisa. Do not tell me this just happened. The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could see the guilt on her face, the way her shoulders slumped as if she were carrying the burden of her actions. But there was no relief in her admission. If anything, it made the pain sharper, more real. I was going to end it, she said quietly, her voice trembling. I knew it was wrong, and I was going to stop. I was going to tell you. I stared at her, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. And when exactly were you planning on telling me? After our 20th anniversary? After you had torn apart everything we built? She wiped at her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. I am so sorry, David. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I still love you. We can fix this. Please, let us try to fix this. I stood there, feeling 1,000 different emotions swirling inside me. Anger, betrayal, sadness, confusion. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to make her feel the same pain I was feeling. But another part of me just felt empty, like a piece of my life had been ripped away, leaving nothing behind. I do not think we can fix this, Lisa, I said finally, my voice quiet. How do you expect me to trust you again? How do you expect me to look at you the same way after what you have done? She reached out to me, her eyes pleading. We can go to counseling. We can talk about it, work through it. I will do anything. Just, please do not give up on us. I looked down at her hand, hovering in the air between us, and for a moment, I considered taking it. But then the images of her with Jake flashed through my mind again, and the thought of forgiving her felt impossible. I do not know if I can do that, I said, stepping back. I need time to think. Her face crumpled, but she nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand, she whispered. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there in silence. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I felt a crushing weight settle over me. I had confronted her. I had the truth, but nothing about it felt like a victory. The life I thought I had was gone, and in its place was a void I had no idea how to fill. The days after the confrontation passed in a blur. I went through the motions, waking up, going to work, coming home, but everything felt surreal, as though I were watching my life unfold from a distance. Lisa tried to act normal, but the tension between us was palpable. The weight of our unspoken words hung heavy in the air, and every interaction felt like we were walking on broken glass. She did not push me to talk, and I was grateful for that. I was not ready. The anger still simmered just beneath the surface, and I needed time to figure out what I wanted, or if there was even anything left to salvage. I slept in the guest room most nights, telling myself I needed space, but really, I just could not bear to be next to her, not after everything I had uncovered. One evening, about a week after our initial confrontation, Lisa came into the guest room while I was getting ready for bed. She stood there in the doorway for a moment, looking unsure of what to say. Finally, she took a step forward. "David," she began softly, "we need to talk. I know you are still angry, and you have every right to be. But we cannot keep living like this, avoiding each other, pretending everything is fine when it is not." I sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at the floor. She was right. We could not go on like this. Something had to give. "I do not know what to say, Lisa," I replied, my voice tired. "I do not know what you expect from me." She moved closer, sitting on the chair across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I expect nothing from you, except honesty. I need to know where we stand. If there is even a chance for us to fix this." I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. She looked vulnerable, her eyes red from crying, her face drawn with worry. But as much as I wanted to believe that we could find a way back to each other, I knew deep down that something had broken between us, something I did not know how to repair. "I am trying," I said, struggling to find the right words. "I am trying to understand how we got here, how you could do this. I do not know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, what is left?" She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. "I know I betrayed you, David. I know what I did was unforgivable, and I am not asking you to just move on like nothing happened. But I am asking for a chance to make things right. I still love you, and I believe we can get through this if we try." I shook my head, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "But how, Lisa? How do we get through this? You lied to me, repeatedly. You hid this from me for months. How do I believe anything you say anymore?" She reached out, placing her hand on mine. Her touch was soft, tentative, as though she were afraid I might pull away. "I do not have all the answers," she admitted. "I just know that I cannot imagine my life without you. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I will do anything, to earn your trust again. Please, David, just give me a chance." I looked down at our hands, her fingers wrapped around mine, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the familiar warmth of her touch. It had been so long since we had connected like this, and part of me ached to let her back in, to believe that we could rebuild what was broken. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, knew that it would never be that simple. "I need time," I finally said, pulling my hand away. "I cannot make any promises right now. I do not know what I want. I do not even know if I can ever forgive you. But I need time to figure it out." Her face crumpled, but she nodded, accepting my words. "I understand," she whispered. "Take as much time as you need. I will be here, waiting, if you decide you want to try." She stood up, lingering for a moment before leaving the room. As the door closed softly behind her, I let out a long breath, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. I had bought myself some time, but the truth was, I had no idea what I was going to do. The next few days passed slowly. I threw myself into work, using the long hours at the office as a distraction. Anything to avoid thinking about what was waiting for me at home. I did not talk to anyone about what was happening. Not my friends, not my colleagues. It was easier to keep everything bottled up inside, to pretend that my life was not falling apart. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the reality was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. The betrayal, the lies, the questions that had no easy answers. I found myself replaying the past months over and over again, searching for signs that I had missed, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything had started to unravel. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen what was right in front of me? One night, after another long day at work, I came home to find Lisa sitting on the couch, a pile of papers spread out in front of her. She looked up as I walked in, her face tired but hopeful. "I have been doing some research," she said, gesturing to the papers, "about counseling. I found a therapist who specializes in couples going through situations like ours. I think it might help us. If you were willing to try. I stared at the papers, feeling a pang of irritation. It felt like she was trying to fix things with a quick solution, like therapy could somehow erase everything that had happened. But at the same time, I knew she was trying. She was offering me a way forward, a chance to rebuild, even if I was not sure I wanted to take it. Therapy is not going to change what happened, I said, my voice flat. No, she agreed, but it might help us understand why it happened. It might help us communicate better, rebuild some of the trust we lost. I looked away, feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to reject the idea outright, to tell her it was too late for therapy, too late for anything. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a way through this. Let me think about it, I said, not committing to anything. Lisa nodded, her expression hopeful. Take your time, she said softly. I just want you to know that I am willing to do whatever it takes. I went upstairs, leaving her with her stack of papers and the weight of our broken marriage hanging between us. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the years we had spent together, the life we had built, and whether or not it was worth saving. The idea of therapy stayed with me in the days that followed. I wrestled with it, weighing my options, asking myself the same question over and over. Could something like this really help? Would sitting in a room with a stranger, talking about the deepest betrayals, somehow rebuild the trust that had been shattered between Lisa and me? One evening, after another silent dinner, I found myself bringing it up. Maybe we should try the counseling, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Lisa looked up from her plate, her eyes wide with surprise and cautious hope. You mean it? I nodded, though I was still unsure. I mean, it cannot hurt to talk to someone. At least we will know if there is anything left to save. Her face softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with. Thank you, she whispered. I know this is hard, but it means a lot that you are willing to try. A few days later, we had our first session with a therapist named Dr. Harper. She was a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor and a quiet office tucked away in a part of town I had never really been to. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with psychology texts and soft artwork that seemed designed to make you feel at ease. But I did not feel at ease. I felt like I was walking into an interrogation room, even though I knew that was not the point. We sat across from Dr. Harper, each of us in separate chairs, and the silence in the room felt suffocating. Dr. Harper glanced between us, her expression neutral, waiting for one of us to start talking. It was Lisa who spoke first. I made a terrible mistake, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, and I do not know how to fix it. Dr. Harper nodded, encouraging her to continue. Can you tell me about that mistake, Lisa? Lisa swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I had an affair, she said, the words coming out like they physically hurt, and I hate myself for it. Hearing her admit it out loud, in front of a stranger, made it feel more real than ever before. It was like a punch to the gut, and I could feel my jaw tighten. I had heard it in my head so many times, but now that she was saying it, I realized just how deep the wound really went. Dr. Harper turned to me. David, how does that make you feel, hearing Lisa say that? I hesitated, unsure how to put it into words. How do you explain the feeling of betrayal, of losing the person you trusted most? I feel like I do not know who she is anymore, I said finally. She was my wife, my partner, and now I do not know who this person is sitting next to me. Lisa's face crumpled, but Dr. Harper held up her hand. Let David speak his truth, Lisa. We will come back to you in a moment. I took a deep breath and continued, the words tumbling out faster than I expected. I do not know how I am supposed to trust her again. Every time I look at her, all I can think about is her with him. Every time she leaves the house, I wonder where she is going, who she is with. It is like I am waiting for it to happen again. Dr. Harper nodded, her expression sympathetic. That is a completely natural reaction, David. When trust is broken, especially in such a deep and personal way, it can feel like the ground beneath you is no longer solid. You are constantly on edge, waiting for the next betrayal. Lisa wiped her eyes, her voice shaking as she spoke. I never wanted to hurt you, David. I hate that I did. I know I was wrong, and I know I ruined everything. But I want to try to make it right, if you will let me. I looked at her, my chest tight with the conflicting emotions that had been building for weeks. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that we could fix what was broken. But the other part of me, the part that was still reeling from the pain, could not see a way forward. Dr. Harper's voice cut through the silence. Rebuilding trust is a long process. It will not happen overnight. But if both of you are committed to the process, it is possible. David, do you feel like you are open to trying? I do not know, I said honestly. I do not know if I can ever stop feeling this way. That is okay, Dr. Harper replied. The fact that you are here today, willing to explore these feelings, is already a step in the right direction. You are not expected to have all the answers right now. This is about taking small steps, one at a time. For the rest of the session, we talked about communication, how we had stopped talking to each other long before the affair started. Dr. Harper pointed out how the cracks in our marriage had been forming for years, but we had ignored them, burying ourselves in work, in routines, in everything but each other. It was hard to hear, but it was also true. By the time we left the office, I felt drained. Lisa reached for my hand as we walked to the car, and for the first time in weeks, I did not pull away. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a start, like maybe, just maybe, we could take this one day at a time. The following weeks were filled with more therapy sessions, more difficult conversations, and more moments of doubt. There were days when I felt like we were making progress, like we were beginning to understand each other again. But there were also days when the anger and resentment flared up inside me, and I questioned whether this was all just a waste of time. Lisa was trying, though. I could see that. She was more open, more vulnerable, more willing to acknowledge the mistakes she had made. She stopped going on work trips, and she always made sure to let me know where she was. She checked in with me throughout the day, not because I asked her to, but because she wanted me to feel more secure. I could tell she was committed to fixing things. But no matter how hard she tried, the memory of her betrayal was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere, casting doubt over every small moment of progress. I wondered if that feeling would ever go away, or if it was something I would have to live with forever. One night, after another long session with Dr. Harper, we sat on the couch together in silence. Lisa turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "Do you think we are getting anywhere?" she asked quietly. I thought about it for a moment, unsure of how to answer. "I do not know," I said honestly. "Some days it feels like we are. Other days, it feels like we are just pretending." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I am scared," she admitted. "Scared that no matter what I do, it will not be enough. Scared that I have lost you for good." I looked at her, feeling a pang of sadness.